In the eternal words of Obi-Wan Kenobi, hello there. Welcome to Centrist Ads, episode 2, or 3 if you're including the pilot. My name's Adam Radford in Valencia. Joining me all the way from Sandbach in England is Kieran Seymour.
Hello there.
And from, I presume, Newcastle under Lyne still, Alex Negad.
Hello there.
Are you still in Newcastle under Lyne, Alex?
I've never left.
Chaps, what have we been up to this week?
Not a lot, really. Just standard lockdown life, really. Yeah, we've all just turned into really dull people who just go for walks. Not that there's anything wrong with going for walks.
Suits me fine.
No, yeah. No, I'm changing job in a couple of weeks, so wrapping up at work, which is fun. Really excited for a new opportunity work-wise. So, yeah, just really looking forward to that, I think. Yeah, not too much. Just trying to stay positive, not turn into an alcoholic. Yeah.
Nice. Alex, what about yourself?
This and that, really. Changing jobs in hopefully a few weeks. And that was it, really. I mean, the weekend was just an excuse to indulge on a couple of bottles of wine, get some gins in there as well. So you get Harry Potter on a marathon. So I mean, that was my weekend.
Presumably not mixing the wine and the gin together.
These were always separate nights. I mean, you can only have Deathly Hallows Part 1 and then the Deathly Hallows Part 2 with a gin.
We're not going mad, Kieran. Good God, man. I've started using a new technique, new in terms of new to me, of watching The Simpsons in Spanish with Spanish subtitles. And whenever there are words that come up that I don't know, I'll write them down in a little notebook. I Google them at the end of the episode, find what they mean. I keep them in a Google Doc, and then I'll watch the episode again, now understanding what they're saying. It's way more effective. So I've been here now for 3 months. And until a couple of weeks ago, I thought, it's going to be fun. I'll watch Spanish language things with English subtitles. That's going to help me because I'll hear the words and I'll think of what the English equivalent might be. It turns out that that's a terrible thing to do because you're just lazy and you just read the subtitles, essentially. Your brain just takes the path of least resistance. So that's one of the things I've been doing. But yeah, just brushing up on some Spanish and applying to a few jobs here and there. Same old. This is going to be a rusty segue, but chaps, we're an international podcast in terms of listening.
Ooh.
I know. We're currently being listened to in the UK, as you would expect, in Germany, in the United States, out in California.
Cool.
The top listeners in terms of the city that is listening to us the most, it's a village in the north of Spain that I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of now. Puente Nansa. Thank you, whoever's listening in Puente Nansa. I am really intrigued to know how you stumbled across us, whether you're Spanish or whether you're a Brit abroad. I want to know what's gone on there, because
in my head, what's happened is one person, maybe an expat or something like that, has been searching for a bit of lockdown political joy and stumbled across probably a dad.
And of all the things to stumble into, they stumble into ours. Sorry. Order. So thank you everybody who's listened to us so far, whether you're in the UK, Spain, Germany, the United States, or if you're in another country by the time this goes out on Sunday morning. And just a quick mention to social media.
We do need to try and post a bit more ourselves. That's not on you, listeners. That's on us. But we'll keep working on that. But what you can do anyway is give us a follow, give us a like on Facebook, a thumbs up, follow on Twitter, and we're at Centrist Dads on both of them. So very easy to find. Let us know if there's anything you want us to discuss as well. We'll take requests. As any good DJ would, we will take requests. So at Centrist Dads, Facebook, Twitter, get on it. Let us know what you think. Thanks.
Brilliant. Without any further ado, let's dive into our first discussion point of the fortnight. Alex, what have you got for us today?
So yeah, it's been quite interesting to look on social media and in the media as well at the government's handling and the perception of the government's handling, and whose fault is it? Is it their fault? Is it the government's fault of how they handled it? And I think it's an interesting one. I think it's one that needs looking into a bit more. And it's interesting when you link it to how Keir Starmer's approach to being Labour leader and how the message is cutting through there. And I think it's one that needs further investigation and scrutiny as well on the government's part. So I mean, if you look at the evidence that there is, I mean, we've got the late to lockdown in March 2020, and Johnson dismissing the nature of COVID and the impact COVID could have in the UK, saying that we're ready for it, and going around hospitals and going around shaking hands and showing off and dismissing it all. And I know also that Johnson has said that there will come a time, in inverted commas, for an inquiry of some sort. I remember at the time Hancock, in about April 2020, Matt Hancock said that it's for the historians to look back on, that he did everything that he could, therefore, scrutiny wasn't going to be permitted in the government. And their efforts as well have been, the government's efforts for suppressing the lockdown, of re-stimulating the economy, has very often been botched.
Sorry, Alex, just to cut you off there, what did Matt Hancock say about not scrutinising the government?
If you look back onto news articles in around about April of it, it was at the time, it was for the historians to look at, and that he knew that he had done everything that he could have.
Order!
It's that interesting, that Teflon Cameron-esque mentality. But if you look at those that were self-employed, and those who are self-employed and have fallen through the cracks of economic support, there's always a dither and dather of going back and forth on whether to offer that support. Feeding children who are on free school meals whilst the pandemic is going on in half term, and it's always a back and forth. It's always very slow to react. They're always caught on the wrong foot, really. And if you look at Rishi Sunak as well, and he's one of the most popular politicians in a time of cynicism, and he's really not come under a lot of criticism. And over Christmas, I was having a conversation with my girlfriend's stepmother, and she was saying that he'd offered her no support as a self-employed person, but she thought he seemed all right and he seemed great and everything. And if you look at the the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, there I think Warwick University did some research on the impact of Help Out to Eat Out and of COVID cases. The second wave that we saw in the autumn was in part due to Help Out to Eat Out, and this is someone who has just gotten away with any form of criticism when there needs to be criticism, and he's widely seen as the next leader of the Conservative Party. So I think it's interesting there, but I think it goes back to the point of any government would have struggled. And yeah, I do buy that. I do think that any government would have struggled, but if you look at the evidence since 2010, since austerity, and looking at things like diabetes, obesity, has increased with the cuts. There's been a correlation with that data, which you can see, where it's gone up as the cuts have been implemented. And looking at the Marmot review of last year, health inequalities and people in poor health and in deprived areas such as Blackpool, Stoke-on-Trent, we've seen a rise in the cases of coronavirus and the rise in poorer health. We were caught with a health crisis, and we were supposed to be prepared for this, and we were told we were prepared for this. But you look at how understaffed our NHS was, how the infrastructure in terms of ICU beds, how insufficient the ICU beds have been. We haven't really been that prepared for it. It was ripe for disaster. Though you can't foresee the big health crisis around the corner, you can't ever judge a pandemic. But if you look at how the health crisis has been in 2010, since austerity has been since 2010, really the evidence is not on the government side, really. And I think if you look at where you could say Starmer, he would have struggled. And God forbid, Jeremy Corbyn, what would have happened if he'd been in? I mean, we're no fans of Jeremy Corbyn on this podcast, as we might go into in subsequent episodes. But I don't think you could blame these people. And I think it's the evidence is there that successive Tory governments have cut the public realm for over 10 years now and have gutted large areas of the public realm. And it's a big challenge there for Starmer, and it's also that evidence really needs to be thrown at the government.
A couple of things that made me annoyed when people say, can't blame the government on this. Firstly, the papers would sure as hell be blaming the government if it was a Labour government that was doing this. The fact that there have been ministers like Gavin Williams, how is Gavin Williamson in a job? I have no clue how he's in a job, how Priti Patel's in a job, how Chris Grayling is allowed outside in public. Like this government is an omnishambles that has been allowed to get away with murder. Prime Minister didn't sack his closest advisor when he clearly took order and drove up north for childcare reasons, and then drove half an hour to test his eyes in the wrong direction, happened to be passing by a picnic site on his wife's birthday, Like, they still didn't sack Dominic Cummings when he should have done it, and the papers didn't hound Boris Johnson. The second thing is that we wouldn't apply this to another policy area, would we? We wouldn't say, well, it's not my fault that the town flooded. It's not my fault that it rained so much. Okay, we allowed people to build on the floodplains, and okay, we cut down all the trees in the catchment area, and okay, we didn't dredge the drains or anything, but it's not my fault it rained so much and caused the flooding. Nobody would put up with that. It's nonsense. There are some really strong antecedent conditions which have led to the UK having 100,000 people dead, and nobody's being held to account, really.
Yeah, I think this question we're saying now, how much is the government to blame for the COVID deaths, is going to be the defining question that we will look back on in history, and probably people will study at GCSE in 10, 20 years' time. My answer is extremely responsible. We have seen other countries manage to, Western countries, developed countries, managed to do a much, much, much better job than we have. You only have to look at Australia and New Zealand to really see that it can be managed. People say, don't buy that. They're much smaller. They don't have as many people. Doesn't matter. Like
South Korea.
Yeah, South Korea. Yeah, and is it what's the other one in Southeast Asia that's done an amazing job? Is it Taiwan? Most countries in Southeast Asia have done an amazing job, and they've done a good job because they planned for this thing. They learned, especially in Southeast Asia, they learned from SARS, and they dealt with it, and MERS, and they had everything in place. We didn't have anything in place, even though there was a report years ago that said we should have been prepared for this, and we weren't. It was ignored. Australia and New Zealand, what did they do that we didn't? Very similar countries, and they were all island countries. So in terms of shutting the borders, if you shut the borders, you can really stop it. And that's exactly what they did. And look where they are now. His own Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has come out and said she wanted to shut the borders in March last year. And we didn't. His own Home Secretary. That's embarrassing. Why weren't they if the Home Secretary said she wanted the borders to be shut? Shocking. The one thing of last year that I will just never forget is him standing there in March saying, I've walked around a hospital shaking hands with patients that have COVID and I'm fine. That is irresponsible.
And then he got it.
And then he got it and almost died. And that is irresponsible. You are the Prime Minister. He is a good time, fun time, happy Prime Minister. He is not made for a pandemic. I firmly believe this is the government's fault, and I find it very hard to see how it's not. I actually had this debate with someone on Saturday night when I was a little bit tipsy and on a Zoom thing, and they were a Tory supporter and trying to back him up, and I have real difficulty is this argument of, and anyone would have struggled with this. Yeah, they would have, but they're not the government. The Tories are the government. They are the governing party. So I don't care about what anyone else has done.
I don't even know if I agree with that necessarily. I'm not saying it would have been an easy time for any government. Obviously, it's not. We heard a lot from Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock how this health secretary has overseen one of the worst death rates in the world and still has a job. Befuddles me. But they were wheeled out every day at 5 o'clock, and they would tell us, we don't want to put these oppressive controls on the British public or this sort of thing. Like, we don't believe in the nanny state in this, so we're going to ask people nicely first, and then under hushed tones, when they don't pay attention, we can then put in the controls and say, well, we had to do it because we gave you a chance, and you've order up, and so now Daddy has to step in and put in the controls. They could have just jumped straight to the controls. That's what they did in the Isle of Man 21 days ago, and 20 days passed with no new cases. It's a centre-right government in the Isle of Man. It's not like it's an ideological split. They could have gone in hard in terms of the restrictions rather than playing this whole, well, we don't believe in big government telling you what to do. Yes, you do. Obviously, personal responsibility comes in a long way, but that you could say that about anything. If only we could all socially distance, if only everybody didn't go to the pub, if only we could all drive at the speed limit, we wouldn't have speed cameras to stop kids getting knocked down outside of school. there are things put in place because people are imperfect, and it's the government, I believe, it's the government's responsibility to put those in place. And I'm not talking about some Orwellian controls that are happening in good times. I'm talking about something that's killed 100,000 people and controls that could have easily stopped that.
I think that's the thing with Sunak, isn't it? He's tried to have the best of both worlds, hasn't he? He's tried to re-stimulate the economy, get everyone out there eating out in restaurants and going to pubs again, and supporting retail and things like that. But you can't have the best of both worlds because our freedoms are then curtailed, really. The problem with trying to have the best of both worlds is you can't have the best of any worlds, really. So I think that's with the Sunak point, and also with what Kieran said about Johnson being the good time prime minister and that he's bags of fun and all this. He's like, oh. We saw it last week at last week's prime minister's question. Johnson easily batted away a question from Keir Starmer, who was trying to grill him on the 100k death toll by saying what the country wants is Parliament to come together and politicians to work to keep the virus under control. This is his ultimate command tactic. He tries to do these things by saying it's not the government's fault, we need to rally behind them, rally behind the flag and all this. He exploits this by saying such rhetoric. And I think this adds to some credibility with which I've been looking at, and it's the works of Daniel Kahneman, a behavioural economist and psychologist who looks at one of his theses are on people disproportionately remember difficult periods in their lives. How they do this is they focus on how it ends. The evidence with that, what I think Johnson and the government would like, is to follow this theory of Daniel Kahneman and exploit the vaccine rollout and say, well, wasn't it great how we rolled out those vaccines? Because they have been ahead of the curve on that. For once, they were able to procure before the European Union, who has now become our de facto enemy, really, hasn't it? For finger pointing and whatnot.
It's very uncomfortable for Britain.
Yeah. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if Tory MPs and the marginals at the next election in Bury North and Bolton North East, places like that, and your Darlingtons and your Redcars start to put on their leaflets and on their social media. Oh, wasn't the rollout wonderful? Didn't we get through it? Wasn't it our greatest moment since the Second World War and all this kind of thing? And I wouldn't be surprised if that actually happens. And if you look, and there is evidence there that it has worked for the Tories in the past. In the 80s under Thatcher, the early 80s when she was unpopular, her government was very unpopular. Using the Falklands War to say it was our greatest moment, our moment of triumph, and rejoice, 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 meant that she was able to go in and win a landslide. And we look at 2015 under Cameron. The earlier part of that parliament was pretty shambolic. The omni-shambles budget, all the austerity measures, how unpopular the government was. I mean, one of the coalition partners had single-digit polling figures at times in the Lib Dems. And he still was able to win that with a majority. And I think the Tories will hope for this to exploit the successful rollout of a vaccine scheme for 2024.
I think you're definitely right. You can almost read it, see it coming, and it'll be combined with leaving the EU was the right thing to do, because if we hadn't left the EU, we wouldn't have had the vaccine rollout. You can see it a mile off. It's 100% going to be what they do. Whether that is enough to make people forget about losing loved ones because of the way the government acted, that's the big question. And that's where I think this is slightly different to other years and other governments, where, like you've just mentioned, Alex, you look back at the post-World War II election, Churchill was a hero, a national treasure. He was the man that guided us through World War II and led us to victory. Everyone expected him to romp home in is it 1946, the next general election? Was it 45? 45. Thank you, Alex. Yeah. 1945 election. Everyone thought he was going to romp it. The country was celebrating. It was V-Day. It was victory. And what happened? They lost because
they'd landslide.
Landslide. No one predicted it, but there'd just been that much suffering that unfortunately it just drives people to sometimes go, you know what? We need a change. And I think that'll be. And I know I said this last week as well. We've also got the horrendous economic consequences that we're going to have to face of paying for COVID and paying for the government's delay and decisions and what they failed to do. We haven't even got to that yet. And that, unemployment's going to go skyrocket when furlough ends. We're all going to be paying more tax in 3 or 4 years' time. And that's not been done for a long time. And if there's one thing people don't like, it's generally paying more tax. And if there's one thing that rich people don't like, it's definitely paying more tax. And if there's one thing the right-wing press don't like, it's definitely paying more tax. So I think there's going to be a lot of consequences still to come. But I completely agree, Alex, that by no means, that by absolutely no means does that mean that the next government, the next election is going to be a Labour landslide. Not at all, because there's a narrative here that could work for them. So it's going to be very interesting. But we'll come on to the Labour side of this, I think, in the next question, the next part. But for me, this blame thoroughly lies in, and I think my final point on this is public inquiry. Are we going to see it before the next election? Because damn well, Mr. Johnson is going to be putting that off and off and off as long as possible, because he knows how damning that's going to be, and he knows, Dominic Cummings, a man who loves a little bit of revenge. Public inquiry, he can really, really stick the knife in, and that's going to be fascinating.
But if you look at a public inquiry and how these things play out, you can just imagine now in the TV debates of the next election, Johnson will probably will argue to commit to one in the next Parliament, a public inquiry. I think that's what he'll look to do. And then when he isn't Prime Minister anymore, that's when the public inquiry can take place.
Does anybody care about a public inquiry? I think it's important. Don't get me wrong. I think a public inquiry is necessary because of what happened, and far more people have died than this country's resources and infrastructure should necessitate, right? So I'm not saying I don't care about an inquiry, but does anybody really care about it when it comes to the ballot box? Because I think you're absolutely right, Kieran. I think there's going to be this, like, nobody likes paying tax. Tories can campaign on freezing your tax or keeping any tax rises lower than Labour. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to take money from elsewhere. My prediction will be they will say at the next election, vote for us and we will halve the international aid budget. Just plucking the proportion out of the air, for a COVID recovery fund or something like that, because that will be, I imagine, extremely palatable, and certainly more palatable to the public than saying we're going to raise your taxes. In reality, international aid is tiny portion of what the UK spends its tax money on.
Not going to be any left if they cut it again. Already cut it, haven't they?
Yeah.
But no, I get your point, definitely, and you could see them doing something like that. I think on the public inquiry thing, I think what's different about this one is the fact that it's going to involve people that aren't politicians. It's going to involve SAGE. It's going to involve your scientists who have no reason to defend the government or try and lie, which obviously you're not supposed to do in an inquiry, but we've all seen the tricks of the trade and what people do. And I just think, scientists, they are very rational, logical people, and they will defend the science and their actions no matter what. So I just think it might be a little bit different, this one. The only other one I can think of that had such significance where similar things maybe happened is perhaps the Leveson inquiry. And I think the difference of this is everyone will be interested, and I think there will be revelations that do come out, especially from the early days in March last year. But I do see what you're saying as well, and I think Alex is probably right in that it'll be announced to happen this Parliament. The next Parliament, that would be so Boris Johnson.
Let's say there's a damning inquiry, the government's response gets panned. I think it's fair. A few fairly easy tactics, a few low-hanging fruit, is to say wherever there's any kind of independent body to put the blame on them, such as there is with who gets vaccinated, to attack Labour and to go out on the attack and to make the excuses like, well, any government would have struggled, and ultimately it was down to personal responsibility. No politician properly addresses these sorts of points because there's no answer, because an inquiry is so thorough and has to have an awful lot of evidence behind it before it makes any damning comments in the conclusion, that you can't rebut in a newspaper, radio show, question time soundbite. You can't do it. But you can say, well, how great was the vaccine rollout?
Mm.
Like you said, Kieran, which you said, Alex, is how people may well remember this. They won't remember do you remember there was supposed to be some sort of tracing app that never happened
Well, beating.
twice? World beating app that twice never happened because the various ministerial mistakes. The now looking back on it, the eat out to help out, it seems utterly bizarre.
Mm. Yeah,
Doesn't
it
it?
was
It seems utterly
madness.
bizarre. We're 6 months down the line, still in lockdown. The idea that 6 months ago people were being given a tenner off to go out and be in restaurants.
It was, and it's been proven. I can't remember the percentage, but it has been proven to have actually increased the spread of the virus. So stupid. The other thing I would say is just something Alex said earlier as well about Sunak, and I don't know. I've just noticed that he seems to have disappeared a bit the last couple of months. I haven't seen him that much on the briefings and the media doing the media rounds. He was much more prominent last year. I'm interested what that's about. Is that because obviously he is the Tory that seems to be coming out the best out of this so far. Is Boris Johnson pulling him away because of he knows that he's a threat before the next election? Is Sunak sitting back deliberately because he knows what's coming, or is it because Dominic Cummings went? I don't know. I'm just interested what's happened.
Bold move, resigns before he has to put in place any austerity measures or tax rises, and says the Prime Minister wanted me to do it, I'm resigning or whatever, and
That would
challenges him for
be
the leadership directly.
that would be a political checkmate move and a half, that wouldn't it?
But then it's still a poison chalice. But I do wonder whether that could sort of protect his legacy in some way.
I also think the one other thing as well is I think as a country, and I think this is partly Boris Johnson as well. His hope messages all the time. Hope. Operation Moonshot. We'll have a normal Christmas. It'll be gone by Easter. Constantly springs this false hope to the country, and we get let down time again. And obviously now the big one is vaccines. We're not over the hurdle when we've vaccinated everyone. COVID's with us for life. It's not going anywhere. We may have to socially distance for years to come and have some measures in place to defend, and hopefully the vaccine eventually is gonna make a difference. But we've just got to be very, very careful about this as well, and the government needs to be careful about this as well, because and hey, if we do manage to get over COVID and we are on top of it, fantastic. Everyone will be ecstatic, of course he will. But there's going to be another one of these that comes along. The impacts we're having on the environment is leading to more viruses crossing over through zoonation. Is it zoonation? Something like that is called. It's got a cool little name of animals crossing out, viruses crossing from animals to humans. Zoonosis. That's an issue. If you look at the last 15, 20 years, you've had COVID, MERS, SARS, Ebola, and the one in Brazil that was having an impact on babies as well. I can't
Zika
remember.
virus.
Zika virus. That's 5 in the last 20 years. So there's going to be another one in the next 3 or 4 years, and we've got to prepare for that. We can't stand still and just accept COVID's gone, we'll be fine now. We need to do what Southeast Asia has done and step up our preparation massively.
By the way, the eat out to help out was between 8 and 17%,
That's
according to
insane.
University of Warwick research, of how much it impacted on
that's
infections.
thousands of lives.
And it cost £500 million to implement that scheme.
£500 million to spread COVID.
Yeah.
Brilliant use of money.
Yeah, uplifting message there, Kieran. Cheers, mate.
Sorry, guys.
So we sort of touched on it a bit there, and obviously, Kieran, you said that we were going to park certain topic to jump onto in the second half. So what have you got for us this week, Kieran?
Moving on to more positive. Is it more positive? I think it's more positive. I don't know. We shall decide, shall we? We're going to go into now a look at Labour, really, because we've spoken about the Tories and how they've handled it. And last week we looked at what the future might hold for Labour this year. And really, I think it only makes sense to start here. Obviously, it's not even been a year since Keir Starmer's been leader. He obviously has had to battle trying to get headlines and policy out there in the press quite severely, given the COVID pandemic. So it's not been an easy start for him in terms of that. He's obviously had to deal with the civil war in his own party and the fallout from Corbynism and the anti-Semitism review. So he's not had an easy introduction, but he's managed to cut the poll gap by 20%. There was one out over the weekend putting Labour, I think, 2 or 3 points ahead. There was one out tonight which had them 2 points behind the Conservatives. So it's really tightened up. But you'd think, given the 100,000 deaths and everything else, should it be a little bit more? It's tough to decide. That's what we're going to talk about. I've been impressed with his statesman-like appearance. And demeanour. I think he does a good job of that. You speak to people. I've spoken to a lot of people that didn't vote for Labour in the last election and actually say, Keir Starmer, I don't mind him. He's all right. He seems like a prime minister. That's the first time I've been able to say that for a long time about a Labour leader, which is good. That those are the people that he is going to need to win over. I'm impressed with his approach to try and make Labour seem that they care more about the country and they're proud of Britain. Not ashamed of it, which I think under Corbyn you didn't really get that patriotism at all. The strategy is clear to me that he is all about targeting those red wall seats that he knows he needs to win back to get elected, because he isn't winning Scottish seats back. So it's all about the red wall and getting those seats back from the Conservatives. Where I'd like to see a bit more from Keir Starmer is, to quote a Marvel comic here, I want to see him get a bit angry. I want to see the Incredible Hulk. I don't know. I want to see him get a bit more
animated.
Yeah, get a bit angry, Keir. It's okay. We don't want to. We're not saying do what Jeremy Corbyn did and scream and shout and go well over the top with everything, but just a little bit more, because the difference is now that's there in the country. That feeling is there amongst the electorate, and we need to see that more from Keir Starmer. Not all the time, but at the right moments. And I think that could have a real impact and could really cut through at Johnson as well. Go for those attacks on Johnson a bit more, because the feeling is there in the country to do that and take advantage of that. The other thing I would really like him to do, and really liked him to come out and say, and this links back to COVID, this would be such a good move to make, is to come out and say, as a Labour Party, our policy is to work towards zero COVID in the country. We will do whatever it takes to make that happen, because I honestly think that's the only way you're going to get normality in society back in the next definitely couple of years. So come out and drive it and really say, we need to aim for a zero COVID policy, whatever it takes. Shut the borders. Let's copy New Zealand. Let's copy what the South Asian countries that have done it so well have done. There's no reason why we can't turn this around and build on the great vaccination that's happened. So that's my thoughts on
zero COVID. Whilst it's should be the aim of everybody, doesn't make me leap out of bed to vote for Starmer. Investing in the NHS that have saved people's lives, but that didn't have the resources that it needed, and that doctors and nurses have been crying out for years and years and years, and we're going to deliver it to them. It's one thing to go out on your doorsteps and clap, but it's another thing to put your money where your mouth is. So we're gonna invest in the NHS, and that might mean raising your tax by a penny on the pound and building back stronger. Kind of what we've seen with Joe Biden. Using this as an opportunity to say, look, like we've got a sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity. The economy has been for a few years and we need to rebuild. because nobody's talking about free markets at the minute. Nobody's talking about free markets when the government needs to step in and prop up businesses. Nobody's saying, oh, it's big government. It's interesting that you're saying, a lot of people are saying to you when you speak with them about Keir Starmer, they're saying, yeah, you know what, I think I could vote for him, because I need to remind myself every now and then that Twitter is not the general public, because people hate Starmer who were big Corbynites. The sad reality is, if people in the papers and Boris Johnson can ridicule the leader of the Labour Party based on their appearance, none of the messages get through. Nobody's listening because your shirt's not tucked in or you're not singing the national anthem. And those things really stick with people, you know, on the doorstep. People didn't like Jeremy Corbyn, and so they're not going to listen to what he has to say. Whereas I think at least they're more willing to entertain that with Keir Starmer. I'd be interested to talk about what the route is with working with other parties, because the same people who are decrying Keir Starmer as being, you know, part of the beige brigade and a Tory sellout. He's clearly not a Tory sellout. But if you're not as left wing as Corbyn, then you must be a secret Tory. This kind of thing. Well, then also having their Twitter handle #GTTO, get the Tories out. Well, you can't have both. You've got to realise that not everybody is voting for the same reasons you are, and it is interested in the same vision of Britain in the future as you are, or that maybe all the people that you spend your time talking with online, they've got to broaden their appeal. And what have we seen? We've seen a new leader broaden the appeal, and they've skyrocketed in the polls. And if you really want to #GTTO, then maybe you have to team up with other people, because you've got to win over people who voted for the Tories. Because at the last election, the Tories garnered 44% of the vote. If you think 44% of the British public are not worth trying to win over, then you're never going to win an election. Not in first past the post. Never. So my thinking is, be brave in terms of the building back stronger idea, make a grand vision, some sort of Attlee-esque vision in terms of what Britain could be. And to do so, don't be afraid to cozy on up to other parties to do it, because divided we lose. It's as simple as that. And if you're in the centre, slightly left, or on the left, your vote is split between Labour, Lib Dems, the Greens, and if you're in Scotland, the SNP, and if you're in Wales, Plaid. Whereas the Tories have only got them, and now the Reform Party that will pick up a handful of votes. That they're not really going to be in the running, I don't think, but they're enough to disrupt the Labour vote in those red wall seats.
It's interesting talking about this, because literally this evening, there's been a leaked internal strategy presentation for Labour that's come out. Have you guys seen it yet?
No.
Really, really interesting. So the headline is, Labour must make use of the Union Jack, veterans and dressing smartly as part of radical rebranding to help win back the trust of disillusioned voters. And that's obviously an internal document. So as a headline, I think that's really interesting. And the whole thing is, as I said, I basically read this just when Adam was talking. I was listening, Adam, I promise. What I was saying about the red wall constituencies, apparently the party is calling those the foundation seats, and that's what they think they need to win to do it. Apparently the biggest thing with Starmer, and this comes back to the incredible Starmer, let's call it the incredible Starmer / Hulk get more angry thing. What voters are, this general voters, not just Labour voters, what they see there's the biggest concern with Starmer is him sitting on the fence, and they want more from him. They want more off the fence and more in your face.
That's what I think will be the main response to what I've said in terms of like broadening the appeal. Oh, then it means you have to sit on the fence, or how can you sit on the fence when it comes to child poverty, and clearly not what I'm suggesting Labour does. There are injustices that I still can't fathom that we haven't overcome in 2021. And it shouldn't compromise on those.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be a Corbynite. They don't have the only solution to it, and the only solution to it is on the hard left, because it's clearly not. Because there are countries that are not as far left as Corbyn's vision, which have better child mortality rates, better attainment rates at school, lower poverty rates, whatever you want to call it. There's something within there that Starmer is somehow morally compromised. If you don't believe in what Corbyn is saying, and I remember from when I was a member, and I was a member for 9 years, but if you don't back him all the way, there's something morally defective about you. I feel like you cannot win over voters who you are simultaneously accusing of being morally defective for being Tories, and that the Tories are evil. Like, you can believe what you want about the Conservative Party, but like it or not, 40% of the public vote this way consistently, calling them names, saying that evil or bad, or that they just don't care, you're never going to win them over. And you're certainly not going to win them over if you're not prepared to counter those easy blows. You're not proud of Britain, you dress scruffily. Cross those ones off straight away. Like, take care of those. That is not the only strategy. And I feel like he's being hammered online for washing down Labour's values and focusing solely on his appearance. And I don't think that's fair necessarily. Maybe I've not been particularly fair towards people who are criticising him or towards Corbyn. If he's going to be able to form a government, it's going to be with other parties. And my position is, if that's going to almost certainly be the case, and there's a long overdue case for electoral reform in the UK, why not campaign as part of your platform for electoral reform? You hoover up some of the votes, maybe you lock in some support, because I want to get the Tories out, and I think the best way of getting the Tories out is unifying parties with as much in common as possible. Like, you don't need to have the Brexit Party, Reform UK in there as well, and nobody's suggesting it. You've got parties in the centre and on the left uniting because they know otherwise, under first past the post system, their vote is split, the Tories will get in, and kids will go hungry. There, that's my soapbox rant over. Sorry.
It's interesting you both say that about what was the term used for the red wall now? It's
Foundation
their
seats.
foundation seats. And Adam, you were saying about the attitudes of Corbynites and the Corbyn voters that are out there. They're still out there, unfortunately. I think there really is that sort of reverence and that sort of following the Pied Piper of Islington. Really reminds me of the support for Trump. It really is red in the tooth. They really do support him, and they come across on Twitter. I mean, I've seen on Twitter, they comment on Twitter about anything. I mean, it's Captain Tom Moore, how he was used as a puppet of the Tory government, or anybody else. It's just this sort of sneering, sanctimonious, I know better, I'm cleverer than you kind of like mindset. But also, I think, but are they really Labour's core vote now, aren't they? Are they really Labour's base vote? I mean, those voters that are in the inner cities, those metropolitan voters, aren't they really the core vote, Labour's core vote now, not the red wall voters? Have the red wall voters really shot themselves in the foot with that? Is now Labour, is Starmer really bringing himself into a battle in terms of having a very open immigration policy and adhering to more left-wing, more of the Corbynite left-wing principles? Will that alienate all those inner-city voters that have that build up huge majorities in in a Hackney or Manchester Central or somewhere like that?
We've got Keir Starmer as Labour leader. What does he have to do to not be sneered at by the people in his own party, or who were very recently in the Labour Party and left because he became leader? Is there anything he can do? Is he irredeemable in the eyes of some?
I honestly think the answer is just ignore them. Just let them do what they're going to do and say what they're going to say and crack on with getting the job done. Because if you pander to them or give them the time, it's a waste of time, because it's not going to win an election.
But that's exactly what he should have done with Corbyn. Not suspend him. He should have just ignored him and let him rot on the backbenches. Instead, he's made him a martyr. That he should have let the man just rot on the backbenches, ignore him, not give him the airtime, not give Richard Bergen the airtime, Claudia Webb, any of these people really, because they are Fruit Loops.
I think the problem with Corbyn was that it was such a public figure, and it was anti-Semitism, and there were so many. He campaigned with the leadership on not accepting anti-Semitism, and what Corbyn did by refusing to apologise, I think he left him with no choice. Definitely take your point. I see what you're saying. Like that would have, in some ways, put him in the background.
Corbyn's in a tight spot there, though, because if he apologises, then there's something that you're apologising for, so you're recognising you've done something wrong.
Yeah, he's never going to do it, is he?
Many people wouldn't in that situation. I can see
No.
I can see why he did it in terms of a clean break. I can see why he did it with Rebecca Long Bailey as well. I completely agree with you, by the way, that you just got to ignore these people on Twitter, because Twitter is not the country, and nobody gives a stuff what such and such on Twitter thinks when you're on the doorsteps. They really don't. They really don't.
No one ever learns after an election.
People absolutely hammer Tony Blair and they want to give Tony Blair the Iraq War, him solely the Iraq War. He's solely to blame, despite the Labour Party en masse, including people like Barry Gardiner, voted against further inquiries into the Iraq War and investigations into irregularities. That's the Labour Party that has done that has voted en masse against these things. Corbyn, to his credit, he was not one of those people. He's been very consistent when it comes to the Iraq War, but the public, by and large, don't really care about the Iraq War anymore. Surprisingly, for some people, this is what will come straight up whenever Tony Blair is mentioned, and that will be it. And I'm on about Labour supporters, but there was something very clear that was effective. He won a landslide. He won 3 elections. He introduced the minimum wage, which benefited my family directly, and introduced grants for students, which meant my mum could go to university. Like, he did some really good things that nobody's paying any attention to because, it's the Iraq War, you've got nothing valuable to say and you're a Tory sellout.
That is Tony Blair's fault that his legacy has been poisoned, ultimately.
Yes.
That isn't Jeremy Corbyn's fault. He's latched onto that. Again, like Johnson, he was able to just play on all those things. Tony Blair would have been seen as a great... I think he would have left about the same time as he did, but he would have been seen as a great democratic reformist prime minister, which used business and the state in equal measures. But no, he was the one that poisoned his own legacy. Really, he made the decision to go back George W. Bush into Iraq when there was no weapons of mass destruction. Back to Starmer, he needs to really. I think he does really do tread carefully with his inner city voters, because we don't want to be in the situation where he is actively pissing off his inner city voters, which do amass huge majorities that do deliver Labour councils at elections. But he needs to really cut through on by the look of the polling as well. Looking at the Lib Dem numbers, he's halved the Lib Dem vote. That might deliver him some marginals. He's losing a bit. He's lost at least about 2% support to the Greens.
That makes sense, doesn't it? That's going to be some of your momentum.
But how does he really cut into that Tory vote? He's in a real bind, because if he embraces the flag too much and goes for patriotism too much, I do fear that he will annoy the Gen Zers and the millennials. We don't want turnout to be lower for Labour, and then that lopsided effect of they've alienated one group to get another one back. That's the issue.
But that's why I'm saying if you're on the left, or and I'm including anybody who is in the centre, who can't bring themselves to vote Tory. If you're somebody who's likely to go out and vote for the Lib Dems, Labour, Greens, and there is a single candidate representing all three under some sort of electoral alliance, let's grow up, let's recognise the unfairness within the electoral system and how it punishes split votes. Let's unite. It's not perfect, but you will get, what was it like Clinton said about voting for the candidate who will get 50% of your policies but will get in, versus voting for somebody who hasn't got a snowball's chance in hell getting in but would enact 100% of your policies.
It's the same with Biden.
It's exactly the same. Yeah.
He built that coalition. Yes, he has debts to pay now to the generally more left-wing and progressive section of the Democratic Party, but he needed to get that base on side. And I do think he needs to make concessions. I think Starmer will need to make concessions to the more progressive elements, more radical and progressive elements of Labour's voting coalition. And I think if he can learn from the Biden win, Labour need to reframe how they look at the Tories and how they give that messaging. They need to really just slam them down as they are reprehensible. Their attitudes are just reprehensible. They don't care. They're a fourth-term government, and they keep getting things wrong. That's what they need to do, and I think that's how he unifies the left, the progressive area.
He has to be careful when he does that, because when he does that, he's got to be saying, I'm talking specifically about the government and the voters, some of whom voted for a lot of whom voted for Conservatives. They do care, and they didn't want these sorts of food parcels going out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I know that's not what you were saying. I'm worried that the pushback from the press that will never, ever be on side with Starmer versus Boris Johnson or versus a Tory, basically, will leap on that and say, oh, you're saying we're uncaring or whatever. I'm going to put my cards on the tables, guys. I think an electoral alliance with a promise from Labour that this is a one election electoral alliance. If we win, we will implement electoral reform, and you agree with the Greens and with the Lib Dems what that will look like, because I think that could potentially lock out the same 40%, the same minority, the same. It is a plurality every election, because it's not a plurality of opinion; it's a plurality of party, because the centre left and the left wins elections if their votes were counted together. So if you have a proportional system that dishes out seats in a more equitable way, the Tories can't just keep pandering to the Mark Francois and the Jacob Rees-Moggs of the world.
I think where it's difficult is as soon as you start bringing in language like electoral alliance, and things like that, you're playing into the Tories' hands there, because you know the rhetoric that you're going to get and the sound bites you're going to get is, well, they're just getting into bed with the SNP, they're getting into bed with the nationalists because they want to break up the union. They'll just do that, and that's the danger with that. So while I agree, electoral reform that could happen before the election.
Right. But the thing is, if there's an electoral, if there's an I can't even speak. If there is an electoral alliance and you're on the left, you're probably not going to swallow this, because you're going to think, I've got something that I really care about. This coalition it will win.
I'll take it even further in some ways. I think what you might actually get, and this is what Gordon Brown is pushing for and trying to work with Labour to move towards, is actually saying the United Kingdom needs to become a federal set of states. That's what Brown is pushing for, because you can't ignore the devolution factor anymore.
No.
COVID, come back to where we started, COVID's changed it. You can't ignore it anymore. Scotland's going to have a thumping majority and mandate for independence, for definitely a vote. And I think there will be something, I don't know if it'll be an electoral alliance, but I think there'll be something big like that you're going to see, where perhaps it is everyone else saying, hang on, the Conservatives are doing this wrong. But my final point I want to make as well is coming back to a point Alex made earlier as well about the open borders stuff and immigration. And I'll just go back to this report for my final thing. And apparently Labour last week had adverts targeting the foundation seats on social media with a Union Jack in the background promising to rebuild the country. And they've also been targeted with, get this is, see, I like what I'm about to say. I like this from Starmer. I think this is the way you need to go to have any chance of winning the election, providing, as has been mentioned, you can keep those inner city voters or not annoy them too much. Red Bull voters have been targeted with ads demanding the Conservative government get tougher on border control, and I'm assuming that's related to COVID, but that's the thing. Use the Tories' language that they use. So don't say we need to shut the borders for COVID. It's that rhetoric that you want to see Starmer using in day-to-day language. The Conservative Boris Johnson, you need to get tougher on border control.
That's not necessarily something which would be the antithesis of a Labour Party. It's certainly not something I'm comfortable with, especially as I'm not in the UK at the minute, and I don't like the idea of closing borders further. But you do have parties, Labour parties around the world, which are firm believers in having more closed borders. Whether you're in Australia, New Zealand, prime example, Denmark, who we hold up as being a paragon of progressivism. You look at what the Labour Party said about immigration and integration and assimilation. If you had a blind test of which party said this and you showed it to people, they wouldn't guess the Labour Party.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not something I'm comfortable with, but I can't say it's a massive surprise.
Adam, I was going to say, if worse comes to it, then you can probably just move to the federal state of Scotland if you need to get back to the country.
We'll see. I certainly can't get dual nationality. I can't. Spain and the UK don't allow it. Yeah, because of Gibraltar. But
of course.
I know. All these things I feel like we could talk about for hours, but all good things must come to an end.
Let us know your thoughts, guys, though. Let us know your thoughts. Hit us up on social media when you've given this a listen.
We have a grand total of 14 followers now on Twitter, Holy cow, 14. So we've almost got enough for a football team and substitutes. Follow us at Kieran if you've got any complaints.
Don't add me.
Don't at me. It's been great to chat as always. So it's goodbye from me in Valencia. It's goodbye from Kieran in Sandbach.
Goodbye.
That was very whimsical. And goodbye from Alex in Newcastle under Lyne.
Bye.
Hello there.